Welcome to Anchored by the Word, the podcast ministry of Westlake Baptist Church in Moneta, Virginia. With your host, Pastor Justin Likens.
Welcome in, everybody, to this week's edition of Anchored by the Word. I'm your host, Justin Likens. This week on the podcast, I'm excited to welcome a very special co-host, my wife of 20 years, Diana. So welcome, sweetheart, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, 20 years of marriage. You know, I've always said, I know exactly why I married you, but I'm never going to ask you why you married me because I'm terrified you're not going to remember. And you may want your money back, but I would say the terms have expired after 20 years. Is that a fair deal?
Not at all.
All right. Well, anyway, as our audience might guess, our topic this week, we're going to start a mini series on relationships, and we're going to kick it off talking about marriage. You know, sadly, marriage is being greatly devalued in our society right now. Used to be that the biggest concern was the divorce rate. But honestly, now many younger couples are simply choosing to cohabitate instead of getting married. And so it appears on the outside that the divorce rate is dropping. And, you know, a lot of times, conservatives and Christians are celebrating, hey, the divorce rate is dropping. But in all honesty, the evidence isn't encouraging. It's not that the divorce rate is dropping between married couples. It's that more couples are choosing not to get married at all. So I just want to ask you a question, Diana. Why do you think a lot of couples are choosing not to get married?
Well, I think that our society today is so me-focused. And I think that people want to spend their time and energy on themselves, and they don't want to have to consider what another person might need. And that's what's necessary to make a marriage work.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's, again, we are a very individualized society in a lot of ways. And of course, that's bled over into the church in a lot of ways. But when we talk about marriage, we know it's God's idea. We see it in the opening chapters of Genesis. He performs that very first marriage ceremony back in the garden. He blessed Adam and Eve's union. And of course, we know biblically marriage is a metaphor for the relationship between first God and Israel there in the Old Testament, but now it's a relationship between God and the church, as Paul talks about in Ephesians 5. So today we want to kind of dive into 5 questions about, you know, what's a big factor for marriage to survive. We want to talk about what has surprised us in 20 years and obstacles, and we'll end it with giving some advice in all of that. So my goal is, you know, for those that are looking towards marriage, that this can kind of help you and encourage you. You know, I always make a lot of jokes about marriage, but it is truly a incredible blessing. I'm so grateful for you and just the life that God has given us. But I also want to encourage those couples that are married and maybe they're struggling right now. Is this fair to say that marriage is one of the hardest jobs you'll ever have?
Absolutely. Marriage is difficult, but it's worth every sacrifice you have to make.
Yeah. Listen, we're not saying anything negative when we say that marriage is going to call for sacrifices. You know, we know that within marriages right now, you have groups that are divorced. You have a Christian subset that, you know, they're not really married other than on paper. And so they're just kind of coexisting. But then you have the healthy marriages. And honestly, I think healthy marriages is probably the smallest piece of that pie. So what I hope we're going to be able to do is speak into those healthy marriages, but also maybe encourage those couples that are struggling, because in 20 years, You and I have had our ups and downs. And so hopefully we can be encouraging there. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to let you answer this first question. What is the biggest factor in a marriage surviving for the long haul?
Well, honestly, the thing that I think is the most important is the foundation that you build your marriage on. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27 are the kind of the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus has spent these 2 chapters really giving us basic principles to live a Christian life. And at the end, he's saying that storms are going to come in life, and we have to build our life on the right foundation. And that right foundation is Jesus Christ, that he is the rock. And we know that a rock provides strength, stability, and reliability. And I think we could both agree that when you're looking at a marriage, what you want is strength, stability, and reliability. So we have to have a relationship with Jesus before we can love anyone else the way they need and deserve to be loved.
Absolutely. I think the word that both of us would use is the word commitment. Before a couple agrees to get married, I think they need to make a commitment to God and to their future spouse. I am with you until death parts us. It's one thing that I harp on in premarital counseling with couples. If they will not take divorce off the table, I'm not going to agree to marry them, because it is just too easy for that divorce card to be used as a weapon to really get what you want. And when we view marriage as being about what I want instead of what I can give, I think we are in a very bad place, and we are headed, frankly, for disaster. I think a lot of people have this view of marriage as being about their happiness. And listen, we should be happy in marriage. In 20 years, I'm not going to speak for you, Diana, but I will say this. I have been overwhelmingly happy the largest percentage of the time. So yeah, marriage should make you happy. But from God's perspective, marriage is really about taking 2 imperfect people, putting them together for life so that they will both see their need for Jesus daily, but also God creating each of them into the image of Jesus, transforming us there. So God uses marriage for our holiness as much as about our happiness. And my personal thought on it is, if you don't make and take that covenant serious on your wedding day, you aren't going to make it, because what you find cute and quirky in dating, you will absolutely find as annoying in marriage. So I definitely think the word is commitment for us. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. And what I'll say, talking about divorce, I honestly feel like the word divorce is almost like a hand grenade in your hand, and it's emotional manipulation. If you don't give me what I want, I'm going to pull this pin and throw this grenade, and it's going to destroy us. And you can't have a good, loving relationship when you know someone's holding a hand grenade.
I love that analogy of the hand grenade, because that is exactly what it is. And the thing is, a grenade doesn't just hurt the person that it's closest to. That shrapnel flies out and it injures people all around it. And that is certainly true of marriage as well. So we'll go on to question number 2 about what has surprised you about marriage. And I would say how long it takes to make a simple decision, like, what are you going to eat, right? No, kidding. Completely kidding. But I think the thing that has surprised me the most in marriage is just how difficult it can be to have time, just the 2 of you. Now, obviously, we have 4 kids. Our schedules are absolutely crazy. But I think back to even when we first got married and after Andrew was born for a little while, we worked opposite shifts. I had a part-time job at Liberty Medical. I was the interim pastor down at East End Baptist Church. So I felt like I was seldom home. And for the record, your parents have always lived close. They've always been willing to give us a date night when we asked. But I didn't really understand the need when we first got married. But now 20 years in, and our kids, of course, they're old enough to be pretty self-sufficient. I think it's still really easy to get so busy that we miss time for each other. So I think that's been the biggest surprise for me. How would you answer that?
I'm actually going to agree with you completely. For me, our dating life kind of led to some unreal expectations in marriage because when we were dating, any time we spent together was focused solely on the two of us. But when we got married and we joined our lives together, well, work comes in the way and family obligations and all of these other things. So I think that I expected much more of, okay, well, this is how close we were dating. We're going to have so much more time together now. And the reality is you have about the same amount of time as when you do when you're dating.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I love time with our kids and our family and doing stuff. But if I'm honest, there are a lot of times where I just crave that time with just you and me. I think the way I typically put it is that's my downtime. That's my safe space. I don't know, as a conservative white male, I'm allowed to say safe space, but it's what I'm going to use because our marriage is that for me. It is a safe place where I can be me, you can be you. And frankly, the cares of the world just seem to melt away for the most part. So I value that.
Well, and I think that we have to recognize how very blessed we are to be one another's safe space because heartbreakingly, I don't feel like that's the case for a majority of marriages. I feel like marriage is just one more war zone. And that breaks my heart. And I wish that more couples could find their safe space in one another.
Yeah, it's, you and I, we've been in ministry together, almost 19 years, really. And so we've kind of seen on the front lines that a lot of marriages aren't as blessed as we are. And it's not that, we're perfect. Certainly I could write a book on all the mistakes I've made, and you could write a bestseller on the dumb things I've done. But it breaks my heart when I look out over churches and friends and even family, when you see that their marriage isn't thriving, but it's like it's just surviving. And it truly is heartbreaking because I believe God wants so much more for our marriages. But we just have to be willing to get ourselves out of the way, make sure that Christ is at the center of our life and at the center of our marriage. And so that kind of, takes me into the third question there. And that is this: what are the biggest obstacles to a healthy marriage? So how would you answer that?
For me, I see two obstacles that I think are really big. And the first one is something we've already talked about: selfishness. We are told from the time that we are born that it is all about us, all about getting what we want and having our needs met. And, we live in a culture of, if I don't look out for me, no one else is going to. And so you take two people who have spent their whole lives focusing on just what they need, and you put them together as a couple, and there's a lot of conflicts that arise out of that. But then the second obstacle that I find really huge is communication. I don't have any studies, I can't give you statistics, but I feel like almost all of the fights and arguments that people get into really could just go away if we focused on truly communicating, listening to understand and not to respond.
Yeah, that last phrase that you just used, it reminded me of Stephen Covey's best-selling book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And, I don't know Mr. Covey's religious beliefs, but having read the book, simply because the elementary school our kids went to, they were one of those pilot schools of the 7 Habits. And, but having read the book, that's one that really stood out to me, because most of the time the fights happen, as you said, we're looking to respond, not to understand. So I guess I would ask you the question, do you think there's a difference between talking to each other and communicating?
Absolutely. Because most of the time we're not talking to someone, we're talking at them. And communication is more work. We have to dive deep. We have to understand maybe what's not exactly being said. I remember when we first got married, one of the issues that became a problem for us was that you could read my emotions on my face. But if you asked me if something was wrong, I would say nothing. And that led to a lot of confusion and hurt on your part, because you're like, I'm not stupid. I can tell that you're upset about something, but you won't share with me what. And I believe you felt like it was unfair. And it was. But for me personally, I understood that what I'm upset about right now may be an irrational thing. It might be something that I'm not going to be mad about in 5 minutes. And I was hesitant to bring it to you because I avoid conflict and I didn't want to fight about things. But finally, eventually, we got to a place where I was able to tell you, listen, I am upset about something, but I really would prefer not to talk about it right now. I'd like some time to process it on my own, and then I promise that I will come to you once I've been able to do that. And when I came to you, I might be able to say, listen, I was hungry and irrational, and what I was upset about, I'm not upset about anymore. Or I might say, yeah, I think I was right to be upset, and let's talk about it now. But just to be able to communicate with you that I need a little bit of time. If I had been able to do that right from the beginning, I think we would have avoided a whole lot of pain on both parts.
Well, certainly you weren't the only one. If somebody was to make a shirt, like the Facebook meme I've seen, I'm sorry for what my face said, I would definitely have to wear that, because I may not always share, what's going through my head, but all you have to do is look at my face and you're going to know pretty quickly. So, I definitely get it. And I agree with you. One of the biggest obstacles is selfishness. Sometimes the selfishness is intentional. But most of the time, I think it's unintentional. An example of unintentional selfishness is when you see your spouse struggling to get things done and you just come in and you sit down and you don't offer to help. Now, I know that example because I have fallen into that trap, or, you get upset with your spouse because you feel neglected. And so you choose to withhold your love from them. And I think the idea of selfishness and communication, we could probably spend 2 or 3 weeks on podcast talking about just those two things. But another issue, and we've kind of already talked about it a little bit, but an obstacle that I see is time management. Having, again, the benefit of being married for a minute. And I say a minute because, we're in a church where there are multiple couples that have been married for 50 plus years. And, I always share with those couples how inspiring that is to me, to their family, to the church, because it is so rare. And when we do counseling for couples, or we've done marriage night events here at the church, we always harp on the importance of date night. We're on a budget like most families, but I think we have gotten better as a couple about being intentional about date night. We've even offered at both the church and the sheriff's office, where I get to be a chaplain, that if a couple needs a babysitter so they can have a few hours together, hey, we are more than happy to do that for them. And, time management, it's not just about sex. It's not just about date night. It's about finding even a few minutes to pray together, and as I was preparing for this, I think probably one of my biggest regrets in the 20 years is I don't feel like I've led well in making sure that you and I especially pray together. But I think that is such a foundational issue. We certainly pray for one another, and you and I'll text each other, hey, how can I pray for you? Or, hey, prayed for you this morning. And that's great. And it's special. But I think something just a little bit more special is when you spend just a few minutes, when you first wake up or when you go to sleep, right before you go to sleep, praying together. And I think some of that for us is, just the craziness of our schedules. When you're getting up, the kids are getting up to get ready for school. I'm getting ready to go to work. Or, if we try it at night, well, sometimes I'm not even there because I'm at the sheriff's department, or, we've both worked so hard all day. We just kind of collapse in bed. But so I think it's one of those things that time management, asking yourself, what's the most important thing I can do right now for the health of my marriage? And I'm going to unapologetically say, pray.
Absolutely.
But again, I think so many of these obstacles, whether it's time management or selfishness, I think they're unintentional. We get busy with our day. We don't think about our spouse the way that we should. In Ephesians 5, that well-known marriage passage where Paul says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. And husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself to her. I think we miss the verse before all of that, which is verse 21, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's a call in our marriage to use what God has given us to serve our spouse and our family. And I can't be selfish and then fulfill those commands. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 7 as well. He says the husband's body is not his, but the wife's, and the wife's body is not hers, but the husband's. And let's just be really honest. That is a radical way of looking at marriage in today's society.
I agree.
So, we come into the fourth question, and what are some pieces of advice that you would give to newly married couples, or even those who, they've been married or they're struggling? So, I would say this: start off in your relationship by praying together. We've already spent time on this. It's not about praying 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour together. Sometimes it's praying for about a minute to 2 minutes together. It will bring you closer to God. It will bring you closer to one another. I would also say focus more on being the right person than finding the right person. Man, Hollywood has romanticized marriage. The example that came to my mind was Jerry Maguire. I guess because when we were writing this, it would have just been on. But, Tom Cruise has been selfish, nearly loses his marriage. Then he has this big event happen where, everything just clicks in his brain and he takes off running back home and he busts through that door and he looks at Renee Zellweger's character and just says, "You complete me." All I can say to that is, no, she doesn't. Listen, I love you, Diana. You mean so much to me, but you don't complete me. I did not have a Diana-sized hole in my heart before we got together. I had a God-sized hole in my heart before he came and filled me and made me who I am. So that's, again, a whole nother topic. But we always hear about finding your soulmate. And so I'm going to make this statement here. I don't even know what that means. Like, what does it mean to find your soulmate? We spend so much time telling people to find the right person and don't settle for just anybody. And certainly there is some truth to that. Okay. We don't want to just settle.
Absolutely not.
But, it's something our oldest Andrew, he's off in college right now. It's the time to learn and grow and maybe fall in love. And we've told him, listen, don't settle. But honestly, more important than finding the right person is we have to be that right person for our future spouse. God is using our relationships, marriage to make us the man or the woman that we're supposed to be for his glory. It's about him. It's not even about us or that other person. So if we focus on growing in our walk with God and growing in Christ's likeness, I trust the sovereignty of God. I think God's going to take care of the rest. He's going to bring that right person into my life. And I think back, just in our relationship, when you and I got together, I was 23. I think about what I was like when I was 18 to 22. If I'm being honest, I was pretty well an obnoxious jerk, at least in a lot of ways. I wasn't ready for a relationship, much less marriage. Before we went on our first date, I had been single for 2 years. Were those a hard 2 years? Absolutely. Did I want companionship? You better believe it. But I would have been good for you. And I can see that looking back right now, whereas in the moment, truthfully, I couldn't have seen. So I praise God for his sovereignty and his perfect timing, because I knew that night when you and I went on our first date, I went back and knew without any hesitation, I had just gone on my last first date. I had met the woman I was going to marry. And I think a lot of it is because of what God had been doing in me leading up to that point. So, Diana, I'll give you the same question. What would be a piece of advice or some piece of advice that you would give to couples looking to get married or those who are newly married?
Well, I agree with all the pieces of advice that you have just mentioned, most especially being the right person. And that's kind of hard because if you're a people pleaser like I am, you might go crazy going, oh, well, this person would like this, so I'm going to be like this, or this person likes that, so I'm going to be like that. But that's really not what you're getting at. It's being the person that God created you to be, not the type of person that you think is going to attract a mate. So I really agree with that point. But what I would also say is don't be afraid of conflict so much that you bury issues when they're little and then they grow and become big issues. when we first get married, we're all in that honeymoon phase and we want to act like everything that our spouse does is just the greatest thing ever. But if we're being honest, two people coming together and living together, that's quite an adjustment. And if you trusted that person enough to marry them, you need to trust them enough to communicate with them in love. This is a problem for me. Maybe it's a small problem. Maybe it's, which way the toilet paper sits on the roll. And maybe it's not a huge problem, but you just need to get it off your chest before it becomes a big problem that you have a lot of emotions behind. And that's one thing that I would have changed, is that I stuffed a lot of issues because we were in the honeymoon phase and I didn't want to disrupt that, happy time. But I buried some things that reared their head later, and they were super ugly with a lot of emotions behind them, and they could have so easily been taken care of in the beginning if I had trusted you enough to be honest with you.
Absolutely. So I want to respond to one thing that you said, because I think this may be the most important thing that people will get off of this podcast. So I hope everybody's listening up. When we start talking about which way the toilet paper goes on the roll, beards are good, mullets are bad. Obviously, I'm kidding. But no, that is the right way. I agree with you. Again, communication, we could probably spend the next 3 hours, if nothing else, teaching the people to learn from the mistakes that we have made in communicating about it. So let's jump to the last question, and it's this. What is a piece of advice that you would give to a couple who is struggling right now? So what would be the advice you would give them?
Well, to be honest, I have read your answer to this question, and I feel like maybe I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit. But my biggest piece of advice is don't give up.
That's right. Listen, you did read my answer, and that's great. For those of you who are sports fans out there, you've probably heard the name Jim Valvano. And one night at the ESPYs, which is a big award show, he gave probably one of the most iconic speeches, at least in my lifetime. He was battling cancer at the time. And, the line from it that everybody remembers is, don't give up. Don't ever give up. And I think that's just the advice I would give it. Listen, maybe your marriage has been in a bad place for a very long time. Maybe right now you don't see any other way to fix it but to walk away. And we've already said, listen, marriage is hard, but I'm going to tell you it is worth it. It may look over to you. It may look lifeless. It may feel loveless. But God can put it back together, and it can be stronger than it's ever been if you trust Him and if you give Him all of you. So often when we talk about problems, it's always somebody else's fault. Well, at some point, honestly, we need to look ourselves in a mirror. And man, I can't believe I'm about to quote Taylor Swift here, but hi, it's me. I'm the problem. And we need to say that. I gotta say, this episode, I'm losing a lot of credit as a man here, but that's okay. But, I want to say this in all seriousness to a couple that is listening and they are struggling. Please reach out to me. Reach out to Diana. We have done marriage events. We are going to do some throughout this year, though we're changing a little bit. But you could reach out to me on social media. You can email me at anchoredbytheword@gmail.com. That goes directly to me because I want to see your marriage not just survive, but we want to see it thrive. If you aren't already doing so, pray each day for your marriage. Pray specifically for your spouse. Pray, God, make me be the man or the woman that I'm supposed to be, because I'm convinced you're going to be amazed at what a difference praying will do. If nothing else, it will help you get off your list of gripes and actually start praying for your spouse. As the late Billy Graham would say, you can't pray for someone and hate them at the same time. And so that's the advice that I would give. And so that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Diana, sweetheart, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute privilege to be able to do this with you, and I look forward to doing more of this and whatever God may have for us in the future.
Thank you for having me on. I was very nervous about it, but I've enjoyed myself.
I get it. It's hard. Now, you have a face for TV. I have a face for radio, so I'm a little bit happier behind a mic than I am out front. But anyway, thank you to our audience for listening this week. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you would like it, leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, and go ahead and share it. By sharing it, you're helping others to be able to hear what's helping and encouraging you. So we pray that God will bless you as you seek to know Him deeper. We pray for your marriage. Until next week, this is Justin and my co-host Diana signing off and wishing you God's blessings. We'll see you next week on Anchored by the Word.
This has been Anchored by the Word. Copyright 2025 to Westlake Baptist Church, 2075 Scruggs Road, Moneta, Virginia.